So let's just go somewhere else. Okay. This is definitely go somewhere else. All right, let's process this here. Hey, wir können doch auch nicht sagen,
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Adventures Through the Mind. I am your host, as always, James W. Jesso. This is episode 87, and before we get into it, I would like to talk to you about something, so bear with me for a moment. My podcasting computer, which is a reasonably souped up MacBook from 2012, is coming apart at the seams. And in order to prevent it from dying at an inopportune moment, I am now about to invest in a new computer. And since I don't want to give, and since I honestly just don't want to give thousands of dollars to Apple for the latest and greatest in programmed obsolescence, I am looking to build a Hackintosh. So I'm about to invest in a bunch of stuff to buy a new computer, and so that I could continue making these podcasts without interruption and with some increased specs for room to grow into something even cooler for you guys. So if you would like to help in that process, I would really appreciate it, and you could do so by heading to my new online shop and buying some stuff like the blotter art or the new t-shirts that just came out or some other limited edition art. Alternatively, what would be great is if you could just straight up give me some money via PayPal, which would be awesome. Or if you say run a computer shop and you have some of the things that I need and you can give them to me at a good price, or you own some of these things, you'd be willing to sell them to me at a good price or gift them to me. Amazing. Anything to help cut costs would be amazing, and anything that would support the cost would also be something I'd really appreciate. Either way, it's going to happen because that's the investment that needs to happen in order to continue my journey with this podcast. So I'm happy to do it, and any support you can offer me would be incredible. PayPal having been mentioned, big thanks to both Travis and Eric for their very generous recent PayPal donations. Okay, into the show. Today's guest is Jason Petty, also known as Baba Moudou Baqui. He is a lifelong citizen of Highland Park, which is a borough of Detroit. He has been a student in the origins of human consciousness since an early age. Moudou is a third-generation metaphysician. His introduction to esoteric came from his father, former Grand Master of a local chapter of an international mystical order. Moudou's early studies came from borrowed, quote, rare mystical texts from his father's library. At his father's urging, he continued his studies of ancient knowledge without the formality of known institutions. He has further continued his studies of shamanism, metaphysics, and entheogenics via travel on several continents and the tutelage under different intellectual traditions. Among his teachers, he credits Kilinid Iyi as a key figure in his knowledge of ethnobotany and the martial sciences. He is an activist, martial artist, urban shaman, behavioral specialist, and educator. Moudou's a very interesting guy. I met him at Ozora Festival this year. He was one of the presenters. He was talking about the ancient role of the feminine in psychic and magical warfare, and it was pretty damn interesting. He was actually the first on-location interview I did at Ozora. This is the second one of this variety. A few episodes back, we had Gene Robertson as an on-location interview, and it went really well, although we didn't actually really end up talking at all about the topic of his talk on ancient warfare and the role in the feminine in magic and warfare. But we did get pretty deep on his experience and what he sees as the potential of psilocybin mushrooms, specifically in sacred ritual, to shift the cultural dynamics of inner city Detroit, which is where he's from. Moudou gives a very focused lens on this topic as we explore most specifically the issues that are coming up in his community community around men and the masculine culture in that area and the role psilocybin can play in introducing vulnerability and the power that vulnerability offers us to become better people. A couple quick technical things to know about. This was recorded on location at Ozora, which was actually quite difficult to find. We had to go really far away from where the party is, as you could imagine, to get good sound. And there's a couple moments where there's like a tractor moving by, and although the sound quality is quite good, it certainly isn't as good as if we were in a sound treated studio room like most of the podcasts are. But the trade-off for sound is the unique quality that comes from a face-to-face, eye contact, real present, emergent, in the moment interview. There's a cut in the middle, which you'll notice with a double click sound, which was because of a camera issue. And we had to end the interview a little bit early due to a very loud tractor getting way too close to us, which happens just at the end there. Either way, I think this is a great conversation between Moudou and I think you're going to appreciate it as well. Big thanks to my patrons on Patreon who enabled this podcast to continue. The names of the people who are giving the most each month are listed in the corner of this episode, in the video screen of this episode on YouTube, and listed in the description to this episode wherever you are accessing it. Except through iTunes, because I only have a very limited amount of characters that I could offer through iTunes. Either way, big thanks to those patrons. If you are enjoying the show, I would really deeply appreciate it if you can sign up to become a patron and put some financial energy towards me monthly in a pledge way to help me, further reinforce the consistency and the reliability of my income as I create this show for everyone. Alternatively, you could drop a PayPal donation, which was mentioned earlier on insofar as helping me to invest in the new computer gear that I need to buy. And links to all of that are contained in the description to this episode, or you could just straight up head to jameswjesso.com/support. That's it. Enjoy this episode with Moudou Baqui here on Adventures Through the Mind.
Oh, Moudou. We made it.
Sir. Yes, sir. Yes,
I'll probably include that last little bit at when we were over there.
Okay.
As well.
Okay. Cool.
Little dynamic. So one of the things you were talking about yesterday that I found really interesting, or the whole premise of your talk yesterday, was this idea of the history around entheogens and spirituality being a part of warfare. And that the women of the tribe were the ones that were entrusted to conduct this type of warfare, the healing and the taking of life, and the sacred plants. Although before we get there, maybe we can get a little insight as to where you're coming from and what your history is with psychedelics.
Okay. Well, I'm coming out of Detroit, Michigan, and my original pursuit in the psychedelic realm came through the practice of martial arts. Kilinid Iyi, he's my master instructor. And once our peer group, our class got to a certain level, I was asking, where to from here? We don't do a traditional belt system because in a lot of regards, it's more of a financial racket in a lot of schools. So we were in interest of how do we develop even further. And Kilinid explained to us that the next level of development was to face the greatest challenge, which is yourself and the unknown. So, for a year, I went under his tutelage, learning how to just prepare the substrate. And so every Sunday, we would meet for a couple hours. He wouldn't say much. He would just tell me what to do. He would just say, hey, go grab the rice. Hey, grind that up. Hey, do this. I didn't understand what we were doing. The first Sunday, I thought that the substrate was the psychedelic.
Right. And when you say substrate, you're talking about the substrate you use to myceliate and eventually grow psilocybin mushrooms.
Yeah, in this case, it was the brown rice flour like the basic PF Tech. So in my ignorance, when I asked him when I would be able to have this experience, he told me, just show up Sunday morning. He gave me an address. So when I showed up, I'm thinking, Here we go. Right. And so as I'm grinding the rice and mixing things, I'm assuming we're making some sacred brew or something, or some potion that we're going to eat. And, the first time after going through the process of sterilization, sitting around waiting and not having the experience, I was a little put off, but I understood what it was. I understood I was entering sort of an apprenticeship. And for the next year and a half, I was taught the mastery, of course, to the PF Tech and then other approaches, other cultivation techniques. And then once I got very proficient, he was able to share with me my first experience, which was very powerful. And it changed my world. And so he then charged me with being the watcher for the rest of my peer circle in the school. And so through my initial experiences and watching my martial art brothers and their experiences, it opened the whole world for me. And it helped me realize that martial arts takes place on many levels. And it was odd because everyone, whether they're a martial artist or not, well, let me back up. Eventually, after I worked with my brothers in the school, people began to contact me and wanted me to facilitate their first experience. And so I purposely designed a space and made sure that it was proper set and setting. And, you know, after a while, it was every weekend I had a new individual showing up. And a lot of this was prompted, you know, through Kilinid Iyi, because this is another level of teaching, learning how to be a responsible watcher and guide. And so, you know, as people would have these experiences, they would report out to family and friends. Of course, they would call me. And then, you know, we have a responsibility ethic. So it's, we don't give you anything. You know, we always believe in teaching people how to fish. So our rule was, yes, you know, we can figure out how to provide this initial experience, but you must commit to at least 3 experiences, and you must commit to learning how to cultivate, so that this doesn't become like a parasitic type thing where you don't take full appreciation for what it is. You don't put the work in to enter into these realms. And so if you could just show up and grab it, you won't appreciate it as much. So we wanted people to commit to a regimen, so that they would at the very least, if they decided they didn't want to pursue it, they could be thoroughly versed and they couldn't just go off of one experience where they may have had a stomach ache or a headache.
And that actually reminds me of a couple things, like from my own perspective too. When I teach, it's like I don't want to I don't want to create a scenario where people rely on me to figure themselves out. And I want to educate people in a way that encourages them and gives them the tools to take care of themselves and to take care of others, to the extent in which they're able to traverse before needing to reach for help again from maybe someone else. And it reminds me of something that one of my teachers said, which was something along the lines of like, my goal here is to make myself obsolete.
Absolutely. Any great teacher, And this is a leaderless movement, and I think on a very base spiritual level, we all feel a responsibility. Well, most of us, I'm sure there are others who have other intentions, but I think we all are aware of not creating that priesthood class, in that hierarchy of knowers, you know, because we know the consequences. At the same time, though, there are those of us who are like trying to push the envelope on these things, but that is no means to elevate anybody. We're all peers, you know, and you know, I think that just comes with experience and enough journeys, because you know, usually you think, oh, I have it mastered, and then you had that one journey that kicks you, and then you're right back down eye to eye with anybody else. So that's the value of this plant too. It really keeps you humble, or these plants.
So I want to get into your primary area of research, but I want to pull in a little bit deeper, pull at some threads here that you're opening up. One of which that feels really relevant to me, and I'm going to ask this question with being really self-aware of the degree of ignorance that informs it. Which is, you're from Detroit, you're a black man. The image that I have of the black community in Detroit is what I've seen represented in film and cinema. I've never been there. I'm aware of how misrepresentative that actually is. And I'm also aware that those are the conditioned perceptions that I have, is to immediately assume that you have problems with gangs and crime and this kind of issues with your community. And every community has issues with that to some degree. And it might not be unfair to say that in Detroit there's a larger per capita issue in certain areas than in others.
Admittedly, yeah.
Yeah, and what I'm wondering is what you're seeing now as the impact of your work inside of your communities on that scenario, or what you see might be the impact, or if it's even a relevant area of discussion at all.
Oh, yeah, it's very much relevant. I think you open up a can.
Right,
So
right.
I'm going to take you down a journey because as a black man in Detroit, many of our people have been shell-shocked through the war on drugs. And not only just the legal ramifications, but the social ramifications where you have family members, friends, or neighbors that have been impacted, whether they are addicts or whether they are incarcerated. And so, it still is very difficult to change the perception of the community regarding these sacred plants. And to speak toward the perception, like all poor or, oppressed communities, many times the violence is intercommunal. So you will face those issues if you are involved in that crowd.
Right.
The unfortunate thing is that the population as a whole gets labeled with that.
Right. Of course, yeah.
I was in Oaxaca, Mexico a few weeks back, and this is the most beautiful place, and people were so gracious and friendly. But, you hear all these horror stories of kidnappings, and as I talk with the people, they were like, yeah, if you're involved in that lifestyle, and to that extent, Detroit is a lot like that. You could peacefully exist in Detroit, make great friends, never have any threats of violence or issues of violence. But it's all depending on your degree of who you interact with.
Of course.
And how it relates to the work with these sacred plants is that I always go back to the word of brutality, because it's never always physical. A lot of times it's psychological. And then when people are quote unquote brutalized, whether politically or psychologically or physically, is a desensitization process which occurs. And this was the root of my talk, because I realized that in human psychology, when under threats of duress and pain, oftentimes in that balance of masculine and feminine energy, we will lend the masculine energy as a defensive force, which means we'll dull those finer perceptions of heart-to-heart communication, of honesty, of all those things that deal with, the essential part of what makes us human.
Right, we pick up the club and start batting around.
Yeah. We have no time to use the fine point pen because of the nature of the circumstances. And so that's the what I hope to achieve in my community and globally, is to bring that balance back so that that individual who has faced some form of oppression or violence can go start to balance again and get in touch, and we rub that callous away.
Yeah. That's
and,
great imagery.
Yeah, and that's I guess that's the basis of my masculine feminine approach, bringing back that nurturing aspect, because most adults after a certain age have wounds that need nurturing, and as men, it's very uncomfortable for us to open up in those spaces, but we know it's very important. And as a black male in Detroit, it's very important. And this is one of the reasons that genocide occurs, because we cut off that feminine aspect. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. So what?
Right.
I'll ride or die, when in reality you're hurting, and you don't see an outlet where you can get that nurturing and that love. So it's a journey for me, because I have to stretch my definition of manhood.
Right.
To include that sensitive, soft, feely part as well.
Yeah. And I feel like this is something that's really quite common among all men that are raised, for the most part, in Western society, and even not just Western society. And I've often described it as like the only two emotions that are okay to show are rage and lust.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, indifference is the way.
Indifference, yeah. Right. Indifference is the currency traded amongst men, but and we can see, and so back to the masculine feminine aspect, we look at modern societies, or more developed societies, quote unquote, and I love that term, developed, because they have all the physical accoutrements, you know, the stable electrical grid, the satellites, the paved roads, you know.
Solid patrimony.
Right.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you have brothers who haven't talked to each other, or parents who kill one another, or, you know, just these crazy concepts. Whereas if you went to a less developed society, it would just be unheard of, you know.
Right.
And so then the question of development, you know, so masculine, feminine, the masculine development of having all the physical accoutrement and stable infrastructure, or the feminine aspect where you have a stable familial social structure. Both had their benefits, both had their weaknesses.
Right.
You know, you can have a very strong, feminine, loving, nurturing, bonding community, but if you don't have that driving, directed force to achieve certain ends and goals and kind of put feelings or emotions to the side, you don't necessarily progress as you could to serve the people. And then in a society that's just hyper logical, hyper functionary, you know, you get a lot of things built and done, but then most people feel lacking on the inside. So it's a balancing act, I think.
I think it would be good for the listeners, although it might be quite intuitive for a lot of people, if you can maybe make a point of clarification as to what you mean when you're saying masculine and feminine. Obviously, what you've described now is clear, but it might be easy to conflate masculine and feminine with man and woman. And I know that's that you have a deconstruction of that if you want to present it.
Yeah. Well, from here on, let's just look at it as electromagnetism, whereas the masculine principle is more of electric, which is the flow of electrons outward, looking for a conduit to reach a particular goal. And magnetism is essentially the drawing of particles to a central location and the cohesion. So that's what I mean by feminine versus masculine aspects, which we all have, right? And so, yeah, just as men, the ability to be still and be patient and let process work out, that's so hard for most men, in particular me, you know, to have faith that the process will work itself out and not to just run out and make it happen, quote unquote.
Right.
You know, this is something I've been developing, you know, don't chase the world, be still, let the world come to you. But easier said than done, right?
Yeah.
As Western men, you know.
And sometimes you do gotta like pick up your bootstraps and go get them.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance,
So before we get into, oh my goodness, this is all on camera and it feels like super loopy, but I'm feeling
I
really...
didn't know how to tell you, man. It's like, hey, that bug's all over the place. You have to edit it out.
No. Really, you gotta just tell me straight up next time.
Okay, I didn't know how to.
Yeah, oh dang. Anyways, sorry about that, viewers. Right, so getting, kind of like merging these things, have you found sort of members of the type of communities where that sort of inter-community violence is present? Have you found any of them, or have any of them come to you? Like, is your work with the mushrooms starting to penetrate those communities? And if so, what are you seeing as the impact of that?
Right. Yeah, my work has made a drastic turn toward working with those communities. It's been very hard penetrating it. To be honest, in my upbringing, you know, I ran the streets. I was affiliated with not so good characters, you know. And in my upbringing, I was able to gain the admiration and respect of them, not through particular acts of violence, but just through them respecting me as a man, you know. And I'm not gonna say I was an angel and that I never, you know, participated in such mindsets, but I matured out of it. And so I guess them seeing my growth and development earned that respect. And so now when I speak about these states of consciousness, they're more open. And as crazy as it sounds, events like this help facilitate that, because you're talking to a population who may not never left the city.
Right.
So when they say, "Hey, Moudou, where you been?" "Oh, I was in Budapest." "What? Where's Budapest? What?" "What?" You know.
Right.
That gives a sense of legitimacy. Like, okay, this guy's just not an average guy off the block. He's pursuing something that's important, and there are people around the world who obviously, you know, see the same thing he's saying. I want to know more. I want to expand my horizons. And so I've actually veered away from the traditional, let me try to word it properly. We have individuals with different degrees of trauma.
Yeah.
And so lately I've been purposely looking for people with the most severe trauma. Because I think they can be the greatest ambassadors for this work, you know, to see how someone like my cousin, you know, who was addicted to crack, and through a series of psychedelic experiences walked away from that, you know, and to see him, you know, have a girlfriend, get a beautiful apartment, have a stable job, get back to the gym and start buffing up and just really regaining his life. I think that's more impactful than anybody that, you know, has first world problems saying, oh, it was great. Right. So I think that will advance this movement even more when we start working with the alcoholics and the severely depressed and things of that nature.
So what do you see as happening there that's making that change for people?
Well, for most of them, what they tell me is that, back to the question of that brutality, the plants melt away the callus, and they're immediately made sensitive to the pain that they've caused others. And through experiencing the pain that they've caused others, they also experience the pain within themselves, you know. And because that callus is melted away, this is how they describe it, the pain becomes so unbearable that night during that experience, of course, they exercise it through tears and vomit, but they still feel remnants of it when they wake up, and that they have to make things right.
Yeah.
You know, and so the first thing that most of them do is atone to those who they love. And I mean, that's so important. Like I was saying before, for a man to sit and really apologize and you know, with tears in their eyes and receive that forgiveness. I mean, that just opens up that heart chakra, and, you know, then life is now technicolor. It's no longer black and white, you know. Right. And they realize, hey, it's okay to be this way. You know, many times when people started this behavior, they were teenagers. So they weren't sophisticated enough to understand the importance of emotional connectivity and honesty and heart-to-heart connection. And so this is their first time in life realizing, like, wow, I'm a grown-up. You know, wow, it's okay to be expressive. It's okay to be honest. It's okay to be genuine. And so it's almost like their 21st birthday. You know, they like, you know, they really start living, you know. And so it's beautiful, you know. And out of that, as you know, we create great bonds and friendships, because once you share sacred space with somebody, especially healing sacred space, there's a bond that, you know, it's a little different than, you know, your average worldly bond.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I like to describe relationships as although we're not islands, but if we were islands, relationships are the bridges where we trade, and what we trade is our vulnerability and our presence. And the bridges get wider and sturdier the more we exchange trust and trustworthiness. And there's a lot of trust that goes in to being that open with another person. I mean, now maybe the metaphor starts to fall apart, but the bridge that's left over after something like that is usually quite strong. Even the relationship doesn't last for whatever reason. There's still always that thing that you share together. It's almost like I see it as an equivalent, not equivalent, but analogous. Never say this word right, but very on par with making love to somebody. Yeah. And like the difference would be like, oh, you like meet up and you're kind of drunk and you fuck, which is like, oh yeah, we like did some drugs, whatever, we partied, but like a deep healing experience is like really beautifully making love with another person without necessarily all those sexual elements involved. But after that, for the rest of your lives, you'll always have had that experience. It like leaves an impact and a bond that's really unbreakable, even if strife and anger and disconnection come later. That thing that was shared is like, it lands deep in the soul of a person. Yeah,
I mean, because y'all basically into the totally vulnerable space, you know, together. So that's, you know, once again, like we're talking, this is a heavy talk for two men.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. To be on the public record.
Yeah, and it may be two men in the audience like, what the heck are they talking about? Well, they'll know once they have an experience. But and people have to understand that there's so many different levels to love. You know, in the West, we have like two versions, you know what I'm saying? And so it's really like the opening of a philosopher's stone. I mean, there's so many pages that are gonna come out of this in terms of defining the human experience, you know, the different degrees of relationship, the different degrees of love, the different degrees of trust, the science of how to build trust, the science of vulnerability. It's beautiful. And so, yeah, I think we really, you know, and like I said, working with the most vulnerable populations, I think will create the largest spread of this work, you know, because those tend to be sometimes the most profound and most spiritually powerful individuals, you know. Sometimes it's those psychic, sensitive souls that get trapped in the drugs because they're trying to find the answer, or they get trapped in the other lifestyle behaviors, not because they're negative individuals, just because they're that animated in spirit that they're vulnerable, you know.
Or even just being deeply wounded.
Yeah.
Like that, there's a great power there, and while the wounds remain, that power is crushing.
Yeah.
But when those wounds are healed, that power is like awakened into a person, and so there can be some really radical offerings there. I mean, for myself, the whole reason I do what I do is because I was deeply wounded and found my way out of it.
Right.
And a lot of the people that I meet that are like powerful and inspiring and helping people, they've all gone through this journey of being deeply wounded, and in the healing process found an empowerment that they now quest to awaken in others as well in different ways.
Right. The Kemetic or Egyptian idea of entering the duat, the underworld, dwelling with the realm of death and pain, and emerging in the morning as the victorious, coming forth by day, you know, and that's, once you pass through that underground and you come forth and you're reborn, I mean, there's a sense of invulnerability, I guess, not to exaggerate, but there's a sense that regardless, everything will be okay.
Yeah, like resilience.
Yeah, and it lends courage, and that's what's needed right now in this world, courage. Courage to go against trends, courage to question authority, courage to, you know, challenge new boundaries, courage to redefine who we are as human.
Courage to be vulnerable.
Absolutely, which is very courageous. That's one of the things, you know, one of the principles in martial arts is usually martial arts works best in defensive mode, you know, so you have to be vulnerable enough to have someone punch you.
Right.
And be okay with it and respond effectively. And that's real vulnerability. So, vulnerability, there's power in vulnerability. You know, I remember I was explaining to a friend of mine, and I don't want to belabor it, but they were talking about vulnerability. And I said, well, just imagine an adult and a 7-year-old child that's having a temper tantrum that wants to, you know, bang on their chest and cry and scream. Now, if you're a truly weak adult, you would smack that child, say, don't hit me, right?
Yeah.
But this truly powerful and wise adult, you know, you'll take the little hits.
Yeah.
You allow yourself to be vulnerable because you realize, you know, I'm bigger than this, you know.
Yeah.
And you can see their pain.
You can see that pain, yeah.
Right? And it doesn't, you're not embarrassed, you're not off-put. It's like the feelings that come up from, I think like we end up harming children as a consequence of us not being able to look at how much pain is already inside of us. And if they remind us of that, we need to suppress it. And one way to suppress it is to, you know, beat them into submission, literally.
Yeah, don't remind me of that, you know, that's true and sad. And so, different ways. There was I was talking with a young man, and he was dealing with issues of jealousy and rage. And it was like so profound, and you can learn from anybody. And this is what I learned. He expressed jealousy in such a profound way that I could never express it. And he told his friend, he said, no, excuse me, I'm sorry. He says, I'm mad because I see you achieving something I can't, and I get frustrated because I can't get there. What greater way to express jealousy.
Yeah.
And that's real vulnerability, because he acknowledged, you're doing something that I can't do, that I want to do. And I get frustrated trying to get there, you know. And that, I mean, immediately they became friends. And then this other individual began to help help them reach their goal. That's what vulnerability does. It's powerful.
And that's a point of connection too, because if someone were to say that to me,
Yeah.
my immediate sense of, well, that explains a lot because I know what that feels like.
Yeah, I say, hey, man, look, I love your podcast, man. I want to, Now, I'm not jealous by any means, but I'm saying if it got to that extreme, that's honest, man. And that allows the healing to take place and the growth to take place. So, I'm just looking forward to, an expansion and growing humanity, especially in my community, because we're always taught to come out the house. You have to come out with the ice grill,
Yeah.
Somebody's walking down the sidewalk, you don't move, they move.
Right.
Somebody's taking too long, you blow the horn, And so when we get to a point where we start to recognize each other for who we truly are, and I think that's my greatest contribution. I've been socially active. I've done the protest, the petition, the getting beaten, arrested by police, the sit-ins, the boycotts, you name it. Even the non-civil disobedience, as we'll call it.
Right.
And none of them, they have some immediate effect, but when it comes to long-term movement, changing of the paradigm, that's why I just made a real shift toward using these psychedelic tools, because nothing is more permanent than that, And so I think, we're going to look back and we're going to see a transformed society, with the work you're doing to document and, use media to teach and share, to the work, that I'm doing and the work that we all are doing. I think we all have something to be proud of. And I think, we just hope the rest of the world could join the party, right?
Right.
You feel guilty, like, man, I wish you could see what I see.
Right, and then there's that balance too, because it's so easy to fall into manipulative, coercive behavior from a place of wanting somebody to have something that's meaningful and positive. Brilliant. And then it's like, it's almost self-destructs in this
Brilliant,
way.
Yeah. And I had to learn that, because I used to egg people like, you sure? Come on, you're missing out.
Right.
And I had to learn to just wait for them, that patience again, and just, offer it, share what I know about it, how it can help, and just leave it alone.
Yeah.
As much as you want to give it to that person. I relayed a story to you earlier about me and my father, Similar situation. My father was my first, most profound teacher of spiritual sciences. And we had a very close bond in that regard. But his limit stopped in the realm of psychedelics, not because he was averse to it. It's just in his era, 60s and things, it became so taboo that he tucked it in the back of his mind and never considered it a real spiritual tool. And that's always relayed as my most meaningful experiences, when I was able to share the space with my father. And then, a day and a half later, he made his physical transition. So when we talk about meaning, my last memory was my dad. We were in a sacred space together, and he was able to get a glimpse of the divine. He was dealing with a particular issue with his lungs, and he had opted to go into a surgery in which, in my vision quest, I told him don't do it. I had a sense of the outcome, but once again, vulnerability. He expressed his desire to proceed, and the only thing I can do as a son, as much as I wanted to protest, was to support that.
Right.
But in my deepest of hearts, I knew that I wanted to share this with him. If the results came to what I was suspecting, I wanted him to get an idea of the divine. I want to share this with him, so that whatever happened, he would be at peace.
Yeah.
Of course, my greatest hopes was that he would, survive the ordeal. But there was a strong psychic impression that it wasn't. But the vulnerability to see it, know what's going to happen, look at your dad and say, okay, I support you. That was so hard for me. But I don't think I could have done it without previous experiences. And so when he did make his transition, of course you go through mourning, but it wasn't the traditional sense of loss. It was more of I wish we could have. but my understanding of the divine and immortality kept me from really falling into that deep depressive mourning, which is another benefit of these sacred plants. It lets you know that ultimately everything will be okay. You're going to face some pain. You're going to shed your tears. But it's always a feather bed landing. At the end. And so it reassured me to just enjoy the ride, man. And also, understand you are indestructible. You are invulnerable. You are part and parcel of this universe, and you will exist. You will exist. And that the bond of love transcends physicality. It transcends time and space. And that assurance that these plants gives me kept me from breaking down and because I know, hey, we're still family. We're still connected. I'm still your son.
Yeah.
We'll engage another time. Just let me finish my adventure. I'll catch up. Something on your face, man. I want to. Okay, you good?
Oh, a bug.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that, and after that experience, I didn't have an experience for about another 2 years. I don't know why I didn't want to go. It wasn't like I was averse to going into the realm. It's that I guess I was somewhat concerned that, sometimes you can go into a realm and reach some very dark places.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I was afraid that I would go into that dark realm. Sometimes you get caught in these thought loops.
Yeah.
And those thought loops would take you places. And so I wanted to make sure that psychologically, I had fully digested the reality, and that I wasn't playing a false thought loop in my head, oh, this is unfair, oh, this is, So I had to make sure I was clean. And when I went back in, luckily, I was, because that was my greatest fear, going in and hitting that really, because we talk about mourning in the wake norm, but mourning in that sacred realm is just, it's very exhausting. So I was a little afraid of encountering that, but it worked out, and I made sure I was clean. And when I went back in, it was great, and so these are things I think that festivals like this help to bring about, are the applications and the techniques for how do you deal with mourning, personal mourning,
right.
Or how do you deal as a facilitator with somebody that's mourning. How long should you mourn before you go into that realm? Or how do you avoid falling into a dark thought loop? So important to the advancement of this science, because all of us are, citizen scientists, and most of us are working with people that we love and trust, and most of us don't want anything bad to come out of the experience, and we're most interested in how to best do it so that positive effects come out of it. Yeah. And so when people gather like this and share their experiences, we all learn from each other.
For sure, and there's the what did Kilinid say yesterday? The luminaries, right? There's the teachers on the stage,
right?
That were coming from all over the world to share with a community of people. Like, this is where the psychedelic people are, and this is where the people using psychedelics who want to use it in a really positive, mature way, they're here too.
Yes.
And they come because they know that the festival's flying in people from all over the world.
That's it.
to share what they've got. So it's a really amazing opportunity for all of us here.
And I think that's what I like about it, is that to other places that I've been, psychedelic conferences, they really catered toward the luminaries. It was a very sterile academic environment. Yeah. And those people who were on the ground doing the work, we just sort of felt like we were in a foreign space. Like, okay, we are here, but, we didn't really get a voice to express. And if it wasn't published with a PhD or a thesis, it wasn't valid. That's not causing too many issues, is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's presenting information for a very select and tailored ends.
Yeah.
Which is the forwarding of academic legitimacy, which is fine.
Yeah.
But then thing is that psychedelic research isn't an exclusively academic domain, and it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. It's speaking toward that masculine, feminine energy, where the academic approach is that logical, logos, male-centered approach. And then the other aspect is the intuitive psychic connection. And So here you can find PhDs, but they'll have their tank tops and flip flops on like everyone else.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And they can't.
They're at the psytrance stage at 2 a.m.
Yeah, right. And we're all one. So titles are set aside here. So that's what I love about this place. And it's been a great experience.
Yeah, so far for me too. Moudou, we didn't get into your stuff about the ancient feminine warfare, but maybe we can have you on the show again someday.
Sure. I appreciate it. I would love to come back. Yeah.
And I really appreciate the conversation we had.
Okay. Thanks, man. Thanks. Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
Well, that's it, everyone. Thank you for listening to Adventures Through the Mind. If you really enjoyed this episode, head over to jameswjesso.com/shop and buy a t-shirt. Alternatively, go check out Moudou's work, of course. And you could become a Patreon patron of the show. I'm just going for it. No cuts, no edits. You could become a patron of the show on Patreon, or you could leave me a one-time PayPal donation. All of the links to do so are at jameswjesso.com/support, as well as listed in the description to wherever you are watching this or listening to this podcast episode. Right, no cuts. Okay, here we go. What's next? No, that's it. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in, and thank you to everyone who makes an effort to buy some stuff off the shop or to leave a donation in the support of the new computer that I'm going to build. Hooray! Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much, and share. Jesus, this is terrible. Goodbye.